Thank you for joining us today at CAM Investor Solutions. My name is Jordan Bennett, and I'm an associate here. Today, we have our senior wealth advisors, Sarah Contino and Marc Jimenez, here to help us with our topic today, which is shiny object syndrome. Topics that we're including today are direct indexing, buffered ETFs, indexed universal life, and annuities.
Thanks, Jordan. As Jordan mentioned, shiny object syndrome is something in life we all have a little bit of, I guess, on occasion, as we all probably would not admit, or maybe we would. But it's something that typically involves new items, things that are attractive, things that other people have, things that maybe are unproven. And sometimes it doesn't always go the way we want when we kind of are drawn to these. And just as in life, in investing, it's often very similar. And the problem is in investing, it can really cause someone to have a very bad investment experience if they go down this path and they're not mindful or careful about what they invest in when it comes to some of these solutions. So I'm going to cover a couple things and start with really this first topic of buffered ETFs. For those who haven't heard of buffered ETFs, really the way to think about them is that they're designed to really have a defined outcome. So what does that mean? There's two popular goals of buffered ETFs. It's either to find a way to get a better return to the upside in some cases, or they're designed to cushion the downside. Those are two of the most popular types of buffered ETFs. There's a lot out there, but those are the two that typically you see sold or marketed out there on the street. Now, I'm not saying all buffered ETFs are bad, but the problem is with buffered ETFs is that you have to ask yourself, what is the goal? Who are they appropriate for? And why is someone actually going to invest in these besides what I just mentioned? And too often, these things, they're not proven. The problem sometimes with buffered ETFs is that they often fail to achieve not just the upside additional return that they're looking for, or they fail to cushion the downside quite often. And why is that? There's a lot of evidence to support this, but the reason for this is because they're using very poor data, in my opinion. They're using data that's very short term, or they're using very general data. And the problem with buffered ETFs is that the data really doesn't exist for very long because they're all very new and they're very unproven. So a lot of times they may look really cool and seem like a really good idea on paper until they're actually put into practice. And the problem for investors is that while they look to go down this path to maybe get that better return, cushion the downside from maybe not wanting to take a lot of risk, for example, they'd be better off just buying very passive index mutual funds or ETFs on the stock side, or owning cash if they're trying to preserve capital to the downside. There's a lot of evidence to support that. So, as you may hear about these more and more, buffered ETFs are continuing to get a lot of press. They're continuing to get a lot of interest out there because, again, they sound really cool when we're trying to maybe pursue a shiny object in the markets or trying to run from risk or when things are fearful in markets too. So that's a little bit about buffered ETFs, in case you were curious. The second topic, which actually has a lot of history, even though people don't realize it, is what's known as direct indexing. That's a term that probably many of you have heard over the last few years, especially because everybody, when I say everybody, I'm talking about big brokerage houses, large advisory firms, both independent, both boutiques. Everyone has used this term and thrown it around as a way to help their clients. Now, for those of us, I know Sarah and I, we worked together many years ago, early in our careers when direct indexing was also kind of known as separately managed accounts or SMAs. That is what is kind of the first word in the industry where we think direct indexing has kind of been, kind of come from, in our opinion. I will say that, in terms of who is it appropriate for, often people with direct indexing or SMA strategies, they're trying to diversify mostly stock exposure, maybe some bond exposure too, but they're trying to pursue other goals like maybe customization. They're trying to maybe do a lot of tax loss harvesting or tax aware investing. And those can be good, but you have to ask yourself, like anything, it sounds cool to see some stocks in your portfolio, but often these things come with some laundry, some dirty laundry, I'll call it. You end up with this portfolio with maybe 500, 600 individual positions with a few shares of all these names that nobody's ever heard of. What also happens, a lot of these are typically sold as a way to maybe tax loss harvest. But the problem is if you understand markets a little bit and believe in capital markets will make you money over time and markets will go up, what ends up happening is that you end up with a lot of positions that have gains that you can't sell. This is a really common thing that a lot of people don't tell investors when they're buying these for the first time. The only way to keep these going for your benefit is if you're constantly adding new cash, for example, in separately managed accounts or direct indexing, right? But a lot of people don't know that, and so they end up with maybe something that they didn't want, and the alternative may have been better just to go in and buy some passive ETFs that are very tax efficient, for example, and maintain diversification a little better, as an example for how investors might think about this differently. So again, these are things that can help diversify. They can help clients maybe complement some other needs they have. But again, usually the easiest solution is going to be better in most cases, and it may not be going down the path of direct indexing, but often right now you're seeing a lot of people buy these and they don't know what they're getting into. So that being said, I'll hand it over to Sarah for her part.
Thanks, Mark. So a lot of the items that I also see in addition to the two Mark have talked about are annuities and universal life insurance, or like variable universal life insurance, which sometimes people might call permanent insurance. If we were to start just talking about annuities, first, what is an annuity? It's really an agreement made with the insurance company that's set up as like a tax deferred growth vehicle. A lot of times what people will hear about these are that they involve like a guarantee of some kind. So you could have a fixed annuity that kind of operates more like a CD. A variable annuity could have underlying investments, almost like funds that your investments can grow in. And then there's these index products that essentially create like a floor or a buffer. So what it feels like is you put your funds into this vehicle and you're told that, you know, they can't go below a certain watermark, but then you're going to capture some upside growth. So initially it sounds great. You've got some principal protection. Again, that floor or a guaranteed income. A lot of times too, if somebody is hearing like you'll get a guaranteed income stream later into the future, that also sounds great. Tax deferred growth is also a big thing if somebody is looking to protect their assets from regular taxable situations. So that all can sound like a really good idea. But there's always a downside. And I think what a lot of people aren't, like what isn't discussed enough are some of the internal costs for starters. So with in order to have this wrapper effect, or to have the insurance company kind of create this investment vehicle, there's a lot of high internal costs, which can sometimes be as much as like 3%. There's also, if we consider like a kind of like a T-chart situation, there is your actual account value, so the money that you put into this, and then there's also the income base. So you can have two simultaneous things happening where you have your investments that go into these insurance or like kind of like mutual fund type investments. It's growing at a certain rate, but then they also have that protection part that they promised you that said, hey, if the market goes down, you're going to still be at this floor and we're going to give you like this bonus structure. So what could ultimately happen is you have somebody sitting with this annuity that has an account value. Let's just say they put 200,000 in, and now they've got 250 in account value, but they have 350,000 in the income base. So if somebody decides, hey, it's been several years, I really am not into this. I don't feel like it's grown a lot. I want to do something different with my money. I'm not going to need the income later on down the road. Now what they're struggling with is if they were going to roll that out, and if this was an IRA, they could roll it to another IRA, but they're only going to be able to leave with that 250. So a lot of times they feel like, hey, I'm leaving the 350 on the table. How do I get access to that? Well, the only way they can do that is by taking advantage of the annuity payouts, which isn't always like a pension. It might just be, hey, we'll pay you out this amount of dollars for a number of years until there essentially is no more money left in this bucket. So it's kind of just a really expensive way to pay down those assets to you. And initially, if we were to look at that, we might say, well, hey, maybe that fits into your income strategy and that looks really great. But a lot of times as Mark mentioned, we've known each other for quite a while. I've been looking at a lot of these annuity statements for over 20 years. And I have to say there hasn't been many opportunities where I've thought this was a great thing that a client did. What happens a lot are people are sold these investment products, they kind of stack on top of each other. And when you start taking into consideration something like somebody's pension, Social Security, maybe they have income from other sources, and now the only way they feel like they can really get the most out of that annuity investment that they have is if they were to turn it into an income stream. But now what we have are a lot of income sources, right? So we've got probably more income than the client needs. They're put into a higher tax bracket. Now they're battling with like IRMA, and everything is just costing that much more. And if they're not using all of that income, now that income is going into cash and sitting in their account. So, again, annuities, we really have to kind of take a look at what is the client getting from this, and how do we also project longer term what that's going to look like for them. If somebody doesn't need to have income later, then we probably have to ask ourselves why we're going into this in the first place. So I think the last, like a question you should be asking yourself on those would be, if the word guarantee was not involved, would I invest in this? And probably one of the last reasons I would look to invest in an annuity is if I'm afraid. Meaning, if I'm afraid of what's going to happen in the market, that should not be a reason that you're going into an annuity for all of the other reasons that I just mentioned. So I see this a lot with people that are getting closer to retirement. They're often, again, presented as something that could provide them with some income stability. They might look at it as a solution to help with, hey, I'm worried about the market. But as we can see, there's a lot of different components here, and they might not end up doing as well longer term with their investments just because of the internal costs and expenses. And so similar to the annuity conversation are also the universal life insurance. So what exactly is that? I mean, and generally speaking, what clients will do is say, I want to purchase life insurance, right, as a protection for myself and my family. And instead of just a term life where you're paying into that every month, and then once you stop paying, it goes away, the idea of the universal life insurance is this is a permanent policy. As long as you're paying into it, or as long as you have a bucket of funds that kind of feeds this, it will continue on. So if somebody is dropping in a lump sum of funds and they're paying into this on a regular basis, the concept that's sold is this can continue on and it can grow. And now you'll have the ability to take out tax-free income at some point in the future if you do a loan from it, or, the idea is the assets can grow. What a lot of people don't discuss, and I don't even think the illustrations do a very good job of helping potential clients understand this, are your cost of insurance will still go up as you're getting older. So the policy becomes more expensive, and now you have internal operating costs that are expensive. You have underlying investment vehicle products that are expensive, and now it just feels like you're throwing good money after bad. I've seen this happen with clients, and the concept is, well, if I'm paying for life insurance, I don't want to pay for it and then have nothing to show for it. Several years down the road. And really, insurance should be a vehicle to help you kind of bridge the gap between where your wealth has grown enough to be able to support you, compared to maybe where you have a higher risk profile, a mortgage still, kids, that type of thing. In some cases, and again, this is not to say that the life insurance is always terrible. There's definitely some parts where it could be important if we're talking about leaving a legacy, or for it to be structured in a particular way. But if somebody's just talking about, I really need to cover my liabilities and make sure that my loved ones are taken care of, this can be a really expensive way to do it. And I think one of the things I've heard over the years too, we really shouldn't be bundling our investment with our insurance. If you think about, and what I've seen a lot of times with some of these products is that people might be paying, more than 4 times the amount of premiums compared to a similar product for a term life insurance. So if that is the argument, then why wouldn't we just purchase a term life policy and then maybe invest the rest, which would offer somebody more flexibility? The other downside that I see to these are that a lot of times people, will sign up to put in a lump sum or start paying it regularly. They will incur a large surrender fee. That the same goes for the annuities too. If they decide to stop or withdraw these funds. For annuities, it could be 5 to 7 years. For the universal life insurance policies, it could be close to 10 years. And I have had in the past where high income earners are now feeling like, the market's down. We've got like going back to, let's just say 2008, and the values have been getting crushed. And now they're still having to put in a tremendous amount of money into this investment vehicle that's expensive, losing value. And they're kind of stuck because if they don't continue to put those dollars in, they're going to have to surrender the policy if it can't keep up with itself. So there can be a time and place, but I think if you start to hear a lot of the terminology around guaranteed, or, if it seems like it's too good to be true, well, it might be, but we also need to consider how it helps you in the long term with your investment goals. Again, I haven't had too many cases where somebody's come to me with an annuity or with, one of these permanent life insurance policies where we've said, this is amazing, and I'm so glad you did this. It usually is trying to figure out how can we work around it because of some of the tax problems or income problems it's created, and the lack of flexibility to then be able to leave the nest egg that they want to their family or whatever kind of goals that they're looking to achieve. So yeah, I would say those can be some challenging categories for sure. And I guess I know we kind of talked about, what would be some alternatives to those. I mean, I think, and Mark, I'll definitely would love to hear your input on this too, but I think sometimes, like in the case of the insurance, just doing a term life insurance and investing the difference is definitely one option. And then in the case of an annuity, I think even sometimes just putting the funds into an investment vehicle, open up a brokerage account, put the cash in there, and just, for the cost and for the long-term growth, once we kind of, work on managing risk, it ends up being better. I think. I don't know if you have any different thoughts about that or opinions for an alternative.
Yeah, I think Sarah, you hit it on the head. There's other options that I think most investors probably should look at or consider. One of the things that I think driven that, not just for what you've talked about and I've talked about, is innovation, right? Innovation, like on the insurance side, I think you highlighted, there's now solutions that you don't have to go down that path. Like you highlighted, there's low cost solutions, there's ones that have greater flexibility and more maybe better for estate planning purposes. The income one, the annuities, I heard a stat recently that over the last 5 years, annuity sales have more than doubled, and they're all-time highs. The good news for investors is that they don't need to go down that path, in my opinion. There's more options that are low cost, more flexibility, and can do the same thing. There's just education that has to, happen, I think, for the investor's benefit. I know for like buffered ETFs, that's one thing that, yes, I think on paper they sound and look like a really good solution, but again, they're hard to customize. There's not a lot of flexibility. You have to somewhat time them right. And similar to what you mentioned for one of your topics, just investing in a globally diversified portfolio that's low cost and tax efficient probably does better. Or maybe being less risky if you're trying to cushion the downside does a lot better and maintains full flexibility. And then on the tax side, as we joked about, working together for quite a while since the early adoption days of SMAs, or now known as, I guess, direct indexing to a certain extent, is that, innovations also help there, where now what direct indexing or SMAs have been used for to maybe get some of that tax loss harvesting or diversification, there's more innovative ways that can multiply the tax benefits. We do them with some of our flex strategies, things that no longer just get a small amount of tax benefits and then lose them, but instead carry those tax benefits for many, many years to offset capital gains, ordinary income, things like that. So there's a lot of things there that we do use innovation for, and we're glad because the person that benefits the most is the investor, our clients. So we like that. We continue to pursue that. And I think we'll continue to do that going forward.
I would maybe just, to summarize a couple of those items and add to that, we didn't even mention, like when you're looking at creating that buffered approach or that kind of helping to protect that downside, a lot of times you're getting capped on the upside. Right. So if you have that cap, that is challenging to then factor into what somebody needs for a long-term projection or return on their investments. So again, it sounds great right at the moment, but what have we done to look at what this is going to do for us 10 years, 15, 20 years down the road, not just for performance, but for taxes as well. So the flexibility needs to be there. Don't operate on fear, and, make sure you understand all of the variabilities and the options that go into it.
I agree.
Any other thoughts or questions? Jordan, do you have anything for us? Oh, you're on mute.
Thanks. I do have a question because I think some of these topics are ideas that people may come in when they're working with an advisor. So like, how do you try to break that mold of saying like, hey, like these are topics that worked for, or ideas that worked for a while, but they might not be the best today. And so how do you sway somebody who comes in with like, this is what I think I need?
Well, I would approach it with, I think we have this a lot actually. People will come in with an idea about what they need to have. And I think the important thing is to kind of meet them where they are, have a conversation and really understand their understanding of it and the importance of it. So if they're coming in from a place of fear, I have to be able to understand what that fear means. Is it fear today? Is it fear I'm just not going to retire in 20 years? Like, how can we really start to break that down and understand it? And then I think to be able to go through and look at every bit of detail around, an annuity. Here's again pros and cons, investing. Here's pros and cons, and even do some financial planning to kind of go out and project that is going to be really important. I think also for us, we have a huge benefit because we work as a fee only basis or fee only advisors. So we're not making compensation on these annuities. A lot of times advisors are going to be making a 5% cut or more on an annuity on a life insurance product. It's kind of like a one and done. I'll plug you in there. Maybe we'll talk again. Maybe we won't. And then that's where I think some of these can kind of go wrong many years later when they're not exactly what they thought they were going to be from a client standpoint. So because we're not paid like that, we're able to really take a objective viewpoint and help a client decide what's going to work the best for you, not just today, but in the future.
Yeah, I would only echo that similar thoughts is that a lot of the planning is going to drive the decision on whether or not these solutions potentially make sense or don't make sense in most cases, like we've highlighted. But also, you had a really good point, Sarah, is that on paper, a lot of these things, not just what we've talked about, but in our industry especially, look really good. But once you take into account fees and then taxes, probably too, almost all, if not all the benefit goes out the door really quickly. And that's
Yeah.
where investors need to look at. We look at it, obviously, but not everyone does, is that big notion of what does it look like after the fees, after the tax impact, not just today, but over time, because again, sometimes the simpler solution's going to be way better.
Yep.
Question.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing that. I think that's so important to realize that like if you're coming from a place of fear, then it's like we need to address where that is actually stemming from because fear isn't just like you can dive deeper into like what the parts you're actually scared of. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that was all I had today.
All I had today too.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining us, and more topics to come in the future. And certainly let us know if you have any questions, and we'll be happy to address them.
Thanks, y'all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.